Hello, everybody. This is Matt Lawrence. I'll have to ask your forgiveness at the outset. I've been stricken with terrible allergies, so I might have to pause from time to time to have a drink of my juice here. Um, so I should start with my personal life. I am married. I've been married for 12 years. My wife's name is Milota. My daughter's name is Emma. She just turned 7 on Wednesday. And my son's name is Sam, and he'll be 3 in November. In terms of work history, I have a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Florida. I graduated there in 1999, and I also have a master's degree in education from Georgia Southern. In terms of work experience, I first got into teaching in 2001. I moved to the Czech Republic, to Prague, to teach ESOL, and I took a job at a small university in the city, and I delivered traditional types of lessons. And also, the school contracted me out to the Czech government, so I traveled around the city delivering small group lessons to Czech diplomats and government officials and engineers. And it was a fascinating couple of years, but after 2 years of doing that, I got a little homesick and moved back to the States, back to Florida, and started looking for a job in the public school system. And I thought I would be able to get a job pretty rapidly, but I didn't have any luck at all. I looked all summer. I traveled all over the state. I had a hard time even getting anybody to call me back. And I eventually discovered that one of the reasons why I was having such a problem was that I was looking for a social studies job in the South, and I wasn't an athletic coach. So that was strikes 1, 2, and 3 against me. At the tail end of the summer, I got a job. I got a call from the principal at Westport Middle School in Ocala, Florida, and she offered me a job teaching special education. And I took it out of total desperation. I had no credentials, I had no experience, and I had no desire to teach special ed, but I really, really, really needed a job. So I took it. I did that for 2 years. And then I moved up to Georgia and took a job teaching special education at McEachern High School in Powder Springs. And after one semester, the baseball coach got forced out of his job for allowing his underage son to have a keg party at his house. And I was able to slide in his social studies position. And I've been doing that ever since. And I never looked back. And I was a little distressed when I discovered that I was going to be expected to write my dissertation on special ed. I thought that whole chapter of my life was long in my past and happily in my past. But then I started thinking about it, and all of the frustration and the anger and the disgust that I had experienced as a special ed teacher kind of came back to me. And I began thinking that if I could kind of harness those emotions and use them to inform my dissertation, then perhaps I could come up with a fairly compelling dissertation. So these are the things that I'm thinking about, and I'm going to need some help with my committee in kind of honing this down into an acceptable topic. So first of all, teacher quality. Many special ed teachers are like I was, people without experience or credentials and have taken the job as a last resort, and are looking for an exit strategy, consequently. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of very committed special education teachers, and especially in the low incidence classes there are. But nonetheless, a lot of special ed teachers are like I was. There's also a whole lot of athletic coaches in special ed. And I suspect the reason why is that coaches, much of their attention is directed at after-school activities. And I suspect that they get into special ed because they think that it allows them to fly under the radar a little more than they'd be able to if they were a regular classroom teacher. So consequently, we've got a situation where students who need the very best possible teachers are getting teachers who treat the job as an afterthought or as secondary to what they do when they come to school. And so that's a really big problem, and it's something that's always bothered me. Another thing that has always bothered me is how we treat and what we do with our learning disabled students. Again, I think we do a very good job with the low incidence students, but with the LD kids, this is how I look at it. We take students who, through no fault of their own, for the rest of their lives, are going to have to work a little harder than everybody else, and we educate them in a framework that's solely designed to find ways for them to work less hard, to reduce expectations, to pretend that due dates don't matter. And I've always wondered what happens to those kids after they graduate. Where are they in their 20s? We know that college professors aren't interested in looking at students' IEPs. And in the job market, can you imagine a a prospective applicant bringing an IEP to a job interview and saying, I'd like this job, but it says here that I'll only be expected to do 85% of the work that everybody else is expected to do. It's just ridiculous. And by the time they get to me, as upperclassmen, many of these students are so paralyzed by learned helplessness that they are unable to do anything at all. And I've always wondered if the services that we're providing to these kids are actually resulting in worse outcomes than if we didn't do anything at all. If they would have better lives if we just left them alone. I think it's a strong possibility. Another thing that I've always thought needs to be fixed in special ed is the paperwork industrial complex. The IEP, the probes, all of the innumerable instruments and all the other nonsense that surrounds special ed, and the time and the effort and the expense. I have a feeling that large amounts of that could be scrapped and nobody would notice that any of it was gone. I was looking at an old IEP from last year, and one of my students' goals was so-and-so will refrain from putting his head down on his desk 90% of the time. And I can just imagine that coming up in an IEP meeting and everybody kind of sitting around nodding their heads as if something legitimate has been produced. And I just wonder, when we treat kids like this, when we set expectations like that for them, in this ridiculous pseudo-scientific edubabble that IEP paperwork is generated in, if we're actually hurting these kids, again, if they would be better off if we didn't do anything for them at all. And that brings me to the last thing that I might perhaps want to look into, is looking at special ed, doing an evaluation of special ed as a whole, or an evaluation of special education services for the learning disabled. We spend a tremendous amount of resources in special education. Time, money, having 2 teachers in many classrooms, and if what we're doing for these kids actually does result in them having better outcomes, then I think the program needs to be left alone. But what if all of the time and effort and the expense that we're devoting towards special education results in neutral outcomes? What if we're not actually helping these kids one way or another? Does the whole program need to be scrapped? Could it be? But the final thing, the final possibility, is one that I think is a strong possibility, and this is much more distressing. Is what we're doing for these kids actually hurting these kids? Is the provision of special ed services resulting in our learning disabled students having worse outcomes in their life than they would if we did nothing for them at all? And I think that's a strong possibility as well. And so that's another direction that I'm somewhat interested in going in. But I really need help with my committee in drilling down into a specific topic, and so I can't wait to begin working with everybody and to get started. Have a nice afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.